If you ask anybody what they know about the Wild West, they would most likely mention Billy the Kid, six shooters, Wyatt Earp, Texas, and our topic of today, saloons. The Wild West Saloon played an integral part in the community of these old Western towns and helped give us Western fans some of incredible stories. Today, we'll be discussing the history of the Wild West Saloon. Welcome to Chronicles of Time, a channel that covers both well-known and obscure historical events. If you like what we're doing here, leave a comment, a like, and please subscribe. It really does help the channel. Watering holes are not unique to the Old West, but the saloon does seem to hold a closer connection to the Wild West than other time periods. Let's look back to the beginning and see how we got to the famous saloons of the Wild West. The first place ever actually called a saloon was a place called Brown's Hole that was established near the Wyoming-Colorado-Utah border. Kind of a strange name to call a place where you would have a drink. This saloon was established in 1822 and catered to the large amount of fur trappers in the area. Early saloons didn't always look like the ones we see in a John Wayne movie. A lot of these saloons were kind of a pop-up establishment that would be thrown together to take advantage of the large influx of miners, soldiers, and followers of the gold rush. Some of the first Wild West saloons were little more than lean-tos or tents just thrown together. A place where you could strike up a conversation after being on the trail for a few months. A place you could grab a drink and see some entertainment. If the small settlement saw a real population boom, the saloon would obviously make more money and be transformed into something that we're more familiar with in the stories and film. In the early days of the saloon, the main drink was whiskey. Before any regulation of distilling techniques or food quality, the whiskey saloons would serve would be made out of raw alcohol with a little burnt sugar and chewing tobacco for flavor. This helped the drink earn its crazy nicknames, such as Tanglefoot, 40 Rod, Bug Juice, Coffin Varnish, Gut Warmer, Red Eye, Neck Oil, and Taos Lightning. The early traders would sell whiskey to Native Americans, and to prove its high alcohol content, the traders would pour some on the fire. This gave us probably the most famous name for whiskey during the Old West: firewater. The cocktail actually was available, but was looked down upon by other Old West men during the time period. If the person was unknown to the saloon or didn't drink their drink fast enough, there are tales of those men being forced to swallow a fifth of 100 proof liquor at gunpoint. Beer was available during the times of the Old West, but was still served a little warmer than we're used to nowadays. This was before refrigeration, and it wasn't until Adolphus Busch, the founder of Budweiser, introduced artificial refrigeration in the 1880s that brought the possibility of cold beer to a saloon near you. Although poker is seen as the most popular game of the time period, it was actually a game named Faro that held the title. Also known as Bucking the Tiger, it was immensely popular during the Wild West and played by all the famous Western personalities that we know and love. Other games such as Brag, 3-Card Monte, and dice games like High-Low, Chuck-a-Luck, and Grand Hazard were also found in saloons around the Wild West. Some of the saloons even became specific for gambling. As population and popularity grew, so did the specific type of saloon. They had saloons specifically for billiards, eating, dance halls, bowling, and hell, just good old-fashioned drinking saloons. There were even saloons that were open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week during the Old West. So, who would you see if you walked into a saloon? Saloons were pretty busy places. It is said that men of the West didn't like to drink alone or even drink at the house. Regulars were very common in the Wild West Saloon. You would also see men from outlaws to miners to laborers and gamblers. You rarely saw minorities in the Wild West Saloon. Native Americans were actually prohibited by law to patron a saloon. Respectable women were also excluded from attending the Wild West festivities down at the saloon. There were saloon girls or shady ladies that you could find there. This tradition actually lasted up until World War I. But there are very, very famous madams that had their hand in the shady lady business, such as Maddie Silks, Julia Boulette, Belle Breezing, Fanny Porter, and Dora Dufran. But we will save their stories for another video. There were also some pretty interesting customs that you would see at a saloon. Men would only ask another man's first name. A lot of times, these characters had some shady backgrounds, and it was considered impolite to be curious about a man's full name. Inquiring about personal business was also looked down on, such as asking a rancher how many cattle he had. Asking questions like that could have you laying face down on Main Street. Another custom was offering the man standing next to you a drink. If a newcomer walked into a bar and didn't offer a drink to the man next to him, he would be asked why he didn't offer. It was also a worse insult to refuse a drink offered to you, regardless of what was to be served. There are stories of people being led from bar to bar at gunpoint to learn some manners. A man could come in and say he had no money, but he needed a drink, and he would most likely have drinks bought for him. However, if he ordered a drink, knowing he couldn't pay for it, he could expect swift justice. When we talk about the look of a saloon, fans usually have a pretty good picture of what to expect. A long bar made of oak or mahogany and polished to shine. Brass foot rails to set your favorite pair of boots on, and a spit platoon by your foot to keep your tobacco from hitting the wood floors. Towels were found on the ledge of the bar so you could wipe suds off your mustache. The decor inside would usually depend on the location. If you were in Texas's big cattle country, you might find steer horns with spurs and saddles on the wall. If you lived up in Wyoming or in the Colorado mountains, you might find a big elk mounted on the wall. Hell, it wasn't uncommon to have nude paintings of women hung around as well. Some of the most important moments in Wild West history happened in a saloon. Wild Bill Hickok was shot and killed playing poker at Natal and Mann's Saloon in Deadwood in South Dakota. This famous murder not only took out one of the most important men of the time period, it also created the most famous hand in poker, aces and eights, the dead man's hand. Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson were involved in multiple saloons and faro dealing throughout the time period. Wyatt Earp actually opened his own saloon in Nome, Alaska. He followed the Alaskan Gold Rush and opened the Dexter Saloon. It was the first two-story building in Nome, Alaska, and was incredibly popular because of the famous owner. There were 60 saloons in Nome, Alaska, with only 20,000 residents. Wyatt Earp ended up selling the Dexter Saloon for $80,000, which is over $2 million in today's money, and actually settled in Los Angeles. There are saloons still standing to this day that you can actually go visit. Some of these watering holes are the oldest saloons in the country. If you're ever in the area, you can pop in and see meticulously preserved saloons from the Wild West area. These include Saloon Number 10 in Deadwood, South Dakota, the Minger Bar in San Antonio, Texas, which is supposedly home of the most cattle deals in the United States, frequently visited by the founder of the famous King Ranch of Texas. It also served Ulysses S. Grant and Teddy Roosevelt. It is said that Teddy Roosevelt recruited most of his Rough Riders from the Minger Bar in San Antonio, Texas. Next we have the Buckhorn Exchange in Denver, Colorado, which was visited by Teddy Roosevelt during his hunting trips across Colorado. The Capitol Bar in Socorro, New Mexico. The Crystal Palace in Tombstone, Arizona, visited by Doc Holliday and Virgil Earp. This saloon still has gunmen who reenact shootments while you're there. The White Elephant Saloon in Fort Worth, Texas is famous for the gunfight between owner Luke Short and Fort Worth Sheriff long-haired Jim Courtright, which we've actually covered on this channel. There are many, many more as well. The saloon is ingrained into American Wild West spirit. Whether it's thought of a place that you find your fortune, or a pit stop as you travel to find your place in this vast country. So many of our countrymen found their way into these watering holes to expand and explore the United States. If you're ever around one, pop on by and support our Old West heritage. Thank you for watching Chronicles of Time. I hope you enjoyed more of our Wild West content. Because of the immense feedback we have on the subject, if you ask anybody what they know about the Wild West, they would most likely mention Billy the Kid, six shooters, Wyatt Earp, Texas, and our topic of today, saloons. The Wild West Saloon played an integral part in the community of these old Western towns and helped give us Western fans some of incredible stories. Today, we'll be discussing the history of the Wild West Saloon. Wyatt Earp's Saloon in Tombstone, Arizona is one of the most iconic locations in the history of the American West. The saloon was established in 1881 by the legendary lawman and entrepreneur Wyatt Earp, and it quickly became a popular spot for locals, visitors, and some of the most notable figures of the Wild West era. In this video, we're going to explore the history of Wyatt Earp's Saloon and the people who visited it, as well as its place in the mythology of the American West. Welcome to Chronicles of Time, where the past comes alive. Delve into well-known and hidden historical events as we journey through the ages. Join our community of history enthusiasts and subscribe to stay up to date on our latest chronicles. Don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps us going. Let's explore the mysteries of time together. Wyatt Earp arrived in Tombstone in 1879 at the height of the town's boom. The silver mines in the area had attracted a population of prospectors, miners, and entrepreneurs, and Tombstone had become a bustling town with a reputation for being wild and lawless. Earp saw an opportunity to make a new start in Tombstone and begin his career as a lawman and entrepreneur. In 1880, Earp and his brother, Virgil and Morgan, opened a saloon on Allen Street, which they named the Oriental Saloon. The saloon was a success, and the Earp brothers soon became well known in the town for their business acumen and their connections to law enforcement. However, the Earps' ownership of the Oriental Saloon was short-lived as they sold their interest in the business to focus on other ventures. In 1881, Wyatt Earp opened his own saloon in Tombstone, which he simply called Wyatt Earp Saloon. The saloon was located on the corner of Allen and 6th Street in a building that had previously been occupied by a Chinese laundry. Earp saw an opportunity to capitalize on the booming business in Tombstone and invested heavily in the saloon's construction and design. The interior of the saloon was a sight to behold. Earp wanted to create a space that was welcoming and comforting for his customers, but also had a distinct Wild West atmosphere. To achieve this, he divided the saloon into several different areas, each with its own purpose. The first area was the bar, which was supposed to be the centerpiece of the saloon. The bar was more than 30 feet long and made of mahogany with a brass footrail and comfortable leather stools for patrons to sit on. Behind the bar, Earp installed shelves that were stocked with a wide variety of spirits, including whiskey, brandy, and gin. The bar was a popular spot for patrons to gather and socialize, and it was known for its lively atmosphere. The second area of the saloon was the gambling room, which was located in the back of the building. This room was where the real action happened, as patrons gathered to play games of chance like poker and faro. Earp himself was known to be an avid gambler and often played in the gambling room with his customers. The room was decorated with ornate chandeliers and plush velvet curtains, which gave it a luxurious and intimate feel. The third area of the saloon was the stage, which was located at the front of the building. The stage was used for live entertainment, such as singing, dancing, and theatrical performances. Earp hired a rotating cast of performers to keep the entertainment fresh and exciting for his patrons. The stage was also used for speeches and political rallies, as Tombstone was a political active town. The fourth and final area of the saloon was the balcony, which overlooked Allen Street. The balcony was a popular spot for patrons to relax and enjoy the view of the bustling town below. It was also used for special events such as parades and celebrations. Wyatt Earp's Saloon quickly became a popular spot for locals, visitors, and some of the most notable figures of the Wild West era. One of the most famous visitors to the saloon was the famous gambler and gunfighter Doc Holliday. Holliday was a frequent patron of the saloon and was known to be a skilled gambler. He often played poker with Earp and the other patrons in the gambling room, and his reputation as a deadly gunslinger only added to his mystique. Another notable visitor to the saloon was Bat Masterson, who was a well-known lawman and gunfighter. Masterson was a friend of Earp's and often visited the saloon when he was in Tombstone. He was known to be a skilled gambler and also enjoyed the lively atmosphere of the saloon. Other notable visitors to Wyatt Earp's Saloon included the famous lawman and gunfighter Wild Bill Hickok and the outlaw Johnny Ringo. Both men were known to be frequent visitors to Tombstone and were often seen at the saloon. Wyatt Earp's Saloon played an important role in the history of Tombstone and the Wild West. It was a gathering place for the town's residents and visitors, and it was a symbol of Earp's success as both a lawman and an entrepreneur. The saloon was also a reflection of the Wild West culture of the time, with its lively atmosphere, gambling, and entertainment. After Earp's death in 1929, the saloon changed hands several times and underwent numerous renovations. Today, the building that once housed Wyatt Earp's Saloon is still standing and is home to a variety of businesses. However, the legacy of the saloon and its famous proprietor lives on, and it continues to be a popular destination for visitors to Tombstone who are always interested in the history of the Wild West. Wyatt Earp's Saloon was a unique and iconic establishment that played an important role in the history of Tombstone and the Wild West. It was a gathering place for some of the most notable figures of the era and a reflection of the culture and atmosphere of the time. Although the saloon is no longer in operation, its legacy lives on and it continues to be an important part of the mythology of the American West. California is littered with hundreds of ghost towns from the days of gold and silver mining. The boom of the gold rush led many to the state in search of riches. The inevitable bust is why we are making this video. Many of these towns are still standing, though uninhabited. This week, we will be looking into 3 of the more popular ghost cities in California. Hello everyone and welcome to Chronicles of Time, a channel that covers both well-known and obscure historical events. If you like what we're doing here, leave a like, a comment, and please subscribe. It really helps the channel. If you have a moment in history you want us to cover, let us know down in the comments. This video is actually from a subscriber, so keep those suggestions coming in. The first California ghost town we will visit is the town of Bodie. Located just northeast of Yosemite and on the border of Nevada, Bodie was established in 1861 after William Bodie discovered gold near what is called Bodie Bluff in 1859. The town started with about 20 miners, and by 1880, the town had grown to 10,000 people. It is estimated that the town of Bodie had 65 saloons. The town had attracted robbers, miners, outlaws, prostitutes, and everything in between. Gambling halls and opium dens also opened with the influx of money coming out of the mines. Hearing about the new boomtown across the country, people slowly started to leave Bodie. Although people started moving from the boomtown, Bodie still produced a ton of gold and silver. It is estimated that $34 million was produced from 1860 to 1941. In today's money, that's $85 million. Profits started falling significantly in the early 1900s, and by 1942, the mines were closed. Non-essential mining across the country was closed because of the Second World War, and in Bodie, the mining never resumed. So what is Bodie now? Well, it's a national landmark and a historic park. 170 buildings still remain on the town of Bodie and has been named as California's official state gold rush ghost town. The town is preserved in a state of arrested decay. Arrested decay means that you only repair to the point that the buildings remain standing. Bodie still sees 200,000 visitors every year, and you can enjoy a great self-guided tour. The next stop on our California Ghost Town tour is Empire Mine. Empire Mine is located in the Sierra Nevada mountains and is one of the oldest, largest, deepest, longest, richest gold mines in California. This is kind of a hot potato situation. Multiple individuals and companies bought and sold this mine from 1850 to 1956. The most well-known and profitable was William Bowers Byrne II. He had commissioned a man named Willis Polk to design, quote, the cottage in 1897. Now, why was the cottage so important? The cottage included a greenhouse, gardens, fountains, reflecting pool, a clubhouse, tennis courts, a bowling alley, and squash courts. Remember, this is the late 1800s. The Empire Mine had the same fate as Bodie. After the 1950s, inflation made the operation unprofitable. The final year of operation was 1956. The mine hit an incredible depth of 11,007 feet. This ghost town is less of a town and more of a ghost mansion and a ghost mine entrance that you can still visit. It was made a state park in 1974, and it's a must-see when you're in the area. Our last ghost town in this video is Cerro Gordo. If you translate Cerro Gordo into English, it means Fat Hill. This mine is partially responsible for the growth and economic development of the city of Los Angeles. Originally discovered by a man named Pablo Flores, this mine was more focused on mining silver than gold. Prospectors flooded the area with tales of silver floating around. The silver out of this area was incredibly pure. It was put through a smelter very close to the mine, and a trade route was established from Cerro Gordo to Los Angeles. This was known as the Yellow Grade Road. The Los Angeles News in February of 1872 stated, quote, "To this city, Cerro Gordo trade is invaluable. What Los Angeles now is mainly due to it. It is the silver cord that binds our present existence. Should it be unfortunately severed, we would inevitably collapse." By 1938, the mining had stopped. Cerro Gordo is now privately owned and still has original buildings and artifacts from that time. The Wild West. Untamed, unmatched. This time in history has been recreated through countless books and movies. One of the most fascinating things about the American West during the 1800s has got to be the gunslinger. This mythical cowboy has captured the attention of history and movie fans for more than a century. The bravery of the lawman, the cunning of the outlaw, and the smoke of the six-shooter. Today, we will be ranking the top 10 gunfights of the Wild West. Welcome to Chronicles of Time, a channel that covers both well-known and obscure historical events. If you like what we're doing here, leave a like, a comment, and please subscribe. It really does help the channel. If you have a moment in history you want us to cover, let us know down in the comments. Let us start with number 10, the Battle of Ingalls. Ingalls is located in Oklahoma and was a hideout for the Doolin Dalton gang in the early 1890s. Ingalls was no stranger to outlaws of the time. The town welcomed their influx of stolen cash. In August of 1893, several members of the gang were hiding out in town and spending time at the Ransom Saloon. U.S. Marshals got word and formed a posse of roughly 27 deputy marshals. While camping along the creek, a young boy spotted the marshals and ran to tell the outlaws. Even though the outlaws were warned, they just returned to their poker game. On September 1st, the posse crept into town to launch their attack. The game was still drinking and gambling in the saloon, all except Arkansas Tom Jones. He was sick in his bed when he saw the attack begin and opened fire from his second-story window, killing U.S. Deputy Marshal Thomas Houston. Outlaws Red Buck, Bill Dalton, and Tulsa Jack rode out of the stable with guns blazing. A deputy named Shadley shot Bill Dalton's horse and sent Dalton flying to the ground. Bill Dalton recovered from this fall and shot Deputy Shadley dead. Bill Doolin would kill Deputy Speed, and outlaws Dynamite Dick Clifton and Charlie Pierce would be shot but survived to escape. The only person left behind was Arkansas Tom. He held out in his hotel room until Deputy Marshal Jim Masterson threatened to throw dynamite into his hiding place. He was captured and sent to federal prison. Next we move to number 9, Harry Morse versus Juan Soto. Harry Morse was a sheriff and dedicated outlaw hunter. Juan Soto was the outlaw that he had been after for some time. Juan Soto, who is said to be a massive man, was hiding out in Central California. Morse led a group of lawmen to the area and found Soto lounging at a table with a few women. Morse ordered one of his lawmen to arrest Soto, but that lawman broke down and ran. Morse fought his way out of the house and miraculously avoided being shot. Morse fled to safety with Soto in hot pursuit. And this is the moment where Morse would earn his reputation as the best-known peace officer and manhunter on the Pacific coast. It is reported that Morse dropped Soto from 100 yards with a shot to the head, thus ending our 9th gunfight. Number 8, Luke Short versus long-haired Jim Courtright. This is named as the last great duel of the Old West. Luke Short was a gambler and a saloon keeper that recently sold his stake at the White Elephant Saloon in Fort Worth, Texas. Long-haired Jim was running a detective agency that was really just an extortion operation. When long-haired Jim approached Short for protection money for the White Elephant, the duel was on. That night, long-haired Jim drunkenly called Short out for a duel. The two faced off at close range outside the White Elephant Saloon. It is documented that Luke Short shot long-haired Jim's thumb off on his first shot. By the time long-haired Jim got his gun to his other hand, Luke Short had already shot him twice in the chest. The funny thing is the two men are actually buried just a few feet away at Fort Worth's Oakwood Cemetery. Number 7, Captain Davis versus the Sydney Ducks. The Sydney Ducks were a Goldfield cutthroat gang that hung around El Dorado County in California. Captain Jonathan Davis was traveling with 2 companions on a trail when they were ambushed by 14 of the Sydney Ducks. Both of Captain Davis's companions were killed almost immediately by the attack. Captain Davis, however, was still alive. Captain Davis opened fire on the group and killed 7 of the attackers quickly. Seeing their opportunity, the remaining group charged Captain Davis with bowie knives and swords. Captain Davis pulled his own bowie knife out and killed 4 more of the group before the remaining survivors escaped. Number 6, the Frisco Shootout. A 19-year-old man with the last name Baca was upset at a drunken cowboy named Charlie McCarty. McCarty was shooting at the feet of Mexican citizens in the town to make them, quote, dance, kind of like you see in Western films. Baca took it upon himself to actually arrest McCarty. McCarty's foreman demanded that McCarty be released and was told by Baca, quote, you have 3 seconds. Baca shot and killed the foreman, and this led to an 80-man mob to return the next morning. Baca took cover in a tiny hut, hunkering down on a recessed mud floor, and he got some shots off while weathering an assault that allegedly sprayed the hut with 4,000 bullets, 367 of those into the door alone. After a 33-hour siege, 4 cowboy assailants would be dead, and Baca very much alive, calmly cooking breakfast in the back. Or so the story goes. The siege ended with Baca's negotiation surrender under sheriff supervision. He faced a pair of murder trials, won 2 acquittals, and went on to a long, prosperous life as an attorney, school superintendent, and a politician. Number 5. The Coffeyville Bank Robbery. We mentioned them at number 10, but here we see the end of the Dalton Gang. The Dalton Gang attempted to rob 2 banks during broad daylight at the same time in Coffeyville, Kansas. When the gang rode into town, they were recognized and word started to spread. While the banks were being robbed, the townspeople armed themselves and opened fire on the gang. At one of the banks, a cashier claimed that the vault could not be opened due to a time lock, and this allowed the townspeople more time to position themselves. All of the Dalton gang was killed except for Emmett Dalton. He was shot 23 times but survived. He served 14 years of a life sentence and actually became a screenwriter in Hollywood, California, and died at the age of 66. Number 4. The gunfight at the Long Branch Saloon. We head out to arguably one of the most famous Wild West cities of its time, Dodge City, Kansas. This gunfight involved Levi Richardson and cockeyed Frank Loving. Richardson was known as slow and awkward, but had a reputation as an excellent gunfighter. The 2 men gambled often together, but Richardson started to develop feelings for Frank's wife, Maddie. The 2 got into a fistfight over Maddie, and threats were made. A few weeks later, Levi Richardson and cockeyed Frank Loving ran into each other at the Long Branch Saloon. Words were exchanged and pistols were drawn, and gun smoke filled the room. Levi Richardson slowly turned towards the billiard table and fell on the floor with fatal gunshots to the chest. Cockeyed Frank Loving was only grazed by a bullet on his hand. He was arrested, but released with claims of self-defense. Cockeyed Frank would actually be killed in Colorado in another shootout after he left his wife, Maddie. Number 3. Wild Bill versus David Tutt. A drunken card game in Springfield, Missouri led to the most famous and one of the few prearranged quick-draw duels in Western history. They were about 75 yards from each other, with cap and ball revolvers, when Hickok said, "Dave, don't come any closer. That's one very difficult shot with a Civil War-era piece." Tutt snapped off the first bullet and missed. Wild Bill took a split second longer, steadied his gun with his left hand, carefully aimed, and hit Tutt in the chest, and that was the end of it. In spite of their extreme rarity, these fast-draw duels became a staple of all things movie scene, where the Hollywood emphasis was on speed alone. If there's one thing Hickok proved in the single gunfight, is that accuracy always takes precedence. Number 2. Wild Bill and the Dead Man's Hand. We again visit our friend Wild Bill, but this time he isn't so lucky. With this gunfight, the most famous hand in poker was born. A pair of aces and a pair of eights, both in black. The Dead Man's Hand. Jack McCall was drunk at the saloon in Deadwood and was playing cards with Wild Bill. McCall proceeded to lose several hands and was soon out of money. Wild Bill offered McCall money to buy breakfast and advised him not to play again until he could cover his losses. Although Jack McCall accepted the money, he felt very insulted at the gesture. The next evening, McCall returned to the bar and saw Wild Bill playing cards. Jack McCall came up from behind and shot Wild Bill with his .45 caliber pistol. Wild Bill Hickok died instantly, and the hand he was playing was made legend. Hickok's last words were supposedly, quote, "The old duffer, he broke me on the hand," not knowing that Jack McCall was behind him. Our last gunfight, and number one, the most famous gunfight of all time, the shootout at the OK Corral. I could say many things about this gunfight. There are entire movies based on the 30-second moment in time. Ike Clanton and Tom McClary of the Clanton-McClary gang rode into Tombstone for supplies. They were known as cattle rustlers, thieves, and murderers. They had multiple run-ins with the famous Wyatt Earp, his brother Morgan and Virgil, and their friend Doc Holliday on October 25th of 1881. Around 3 p.m., the Earps and Holliday spotted 5 members of the Clanton-McClary gang in a vacant lot behind the OK Corral. In 30 seconds, around 30 shots were fired. It is still debated on who shot first, but reports say that Virgil Earp shot Billy Clanton point blank, and Doc Holliday shot Tom McClary in the chest with a shotgun. Virgil Earp, Morgan Earp, and Doc Holliday were wounded but survived. The Earps and Holliday were charged with murder, but a month later, a judge found the men not guilty. The judge said, quote, "They were fully justified in committing these homicides." That completes our list of top 10 gunfights. Thanks for watching. The Wild West has incredible storylines and characters that have enthralled fans for over a century. Almost as famous as the outlaws and lawmen are the weapons they used. You could write entire books on the guns that won the West, the Winchester Model 1873 and the Colt Single Action Army Revolver. But they weren't the only 2 weapons on the market. The American Industrial Revolution of 1870s brought huge new ideas to the weapons industry. This episode, we'll be covering firearms that don't fit into the Western lore. We'll be covering the weirdest weapons of the Wild West. Hello everyone, and welcome to Chronicles of Time, a channel that covers both well-known and obscure historical events. If you like what we're doing here, give us a like, a comment, and please subscribe. It really does help the channel. Although some of these weapons are pretty weird in design, many of them paved the way to huge technological advances for American weaponry. First up, we have the harmonica gun. This was an early attempt at weapons with a high ammunition capacity. Since metal cartridges weren't in use yet, each shot was loaded with powder, primer, and projectile in its own housing, sometimes with up to 9 to 10 rounds. There are 2 main designs for the harmonica gun. One is where the magazine moves to a single barrel when fired. The other is where every shot has its own barrel. When self-contained ammunition hit the market, the harmonica gun became obsolete. It was also pretty awkward to conceal and store because the magazine was stuck out on each side. The famous first president of Texas, Sam Houston, had a harmonica gun, and it can be found in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. The harmonica gun actually made it to the big screen. Yul Brynner used one in his spaghetti western, Adios Simbada. The LeMat Revolver. The LeMat Revolver, also known as the Grape Shot Revolver, was invented in New Orleans by John Alexander LeMat in 1856. When first looking at this revolver, it seems pretty normal, but it has a little secret that helps the user a little bit in close encounters. This revolver has a 9-shot cylinder that revolves around a separate center barrel that has one shot of a more powerful round, usually a 20 gauge. The person wielding this weapon could flip a switch on the hammer to access the bigger round. The LeMat was issued to the Confederate Army, but ran into issues with production during the Civil War. Only around 3,000 LeMat revolvers were produced between 1856 and 1865. The Derringer. Just because we have a list of weird weapons doesn't mean that some of them aren't successful. The name Derringer really became a blanket word used in everyday language for a small gun. The original Derringer was a Philadelphia Derringer. Take note, there is different spelling between those two words. It was made by a man named Henry Derringer. The original was a muzzle-loaded cap-lock single-shot pistol. Around 15,000 were manufactured of this early 1825 model. This firearm became a household name when John Wilkes Booth used a Derringer when he assassinated President Lincoln. Because of trademarking issues and copycats, the name was colloquially changed to Derringer with 2 R's. It was so successful that all pocket-sized guns were called Derringers, like all tissues are called Kleenex. The design went from the early muzzle-loaded pistol to pinfire, rimfire, and centerfire cartridges. This gun was popular with everyday citizens, but became extremely popular with gamblers and women of the night. Derringers are still being produced to this day. The Pepperbox Revolver. The Pepperbox was really more popular right before the time period of the Old West. It was extremely popular in the 1830s and 1840s during the California Gold Rush because the gun could fire more than one shot without being reloaded. I researched all sorts of info for this weapon and came across a Mark Twain quote that sums it up perfectly. Quote, "He wore in his belt an old original Allen revolver, such as irreverent people called a pepperbox. Simply drawing the trigger back, cocked and fired the pistol. As the trigger came back, the hammer would begin to rise and the barrel to turn over, and presently down would drop the hammer and away would speed the ball. To aim along the turning barrel and hit the thing aimed at was a feat which was probably never done with an Allen in the world. It was a cheerful weapon, the Allen. Sometimes all its 6 barrels would go off at once, and then there was no safe place in all the region round about, but behind it." End quote. The Revolving Rifle. The revolving rifle was an early repeating rifle produced by the Colts Manufacturing Company from 1855 to 1864. Its design is very similar to the revolver pistols that we're all familiar with the study of Wild West history. These rifles were popular because of the ever-present theme of the high rate of fire. The revolving rifle made an appearance in the Civil War, but was really used on the famous Pony Express. The weapon did have its downfalls. It had the advantage with its high rate of fire, but the weapon would take forever to load after its 5 or 6 shots were fired. During the Seminole Wars, the Seminole warriors figured this out and would rush the Army's position after the first volley of shots. It was used even more by the Pony Express on the run between Independence, Missouri and Santa Fe, New Mexico. This dangerous run had 8 men who guarded the express, and according to the Missouri government, quote, "These 8 men are ready in case of an attack to discharge 136 shots without having to reload. We have no fears for the safety of the mail." End quote. The Colt revolving rifle was also used by the famous Australian outlaw Ned Kelly during a fight with the Victoria Police in 1880. The volcanic pistol was known as a revolutionary weapon because it introduced the early stages of a lever action that is still used today. This lever action pistol used a bullet called a rocket ball cartridge. This bullet had a hollow cavity that contained a powder charge. The ammunition was waterproof, but lacked any real stopping power. The gun also didn't have a cleaning rod to clear misfired rounds out. Although the volcanic pistol wasn't a top seller, its original company broke into two of the most recognizable firearm companies in American history. Horace Smith and Daniel B. Wesson were partners that joined the company in 1854 and began gathering investors. They broke off and started their own firearms company, Smith & Wesson. Who took over the Volcanic Arms Company after Smith & Wesson left? One of their investors, Oliver Winchester. After reorganizing the company a few times, Oliver Winchester changed the name to the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, and the most famous gun in the Wild West was born, the lever-action Winchester rifle.
The Evans Repeating Rifle. The Evans Repeating Rifle may look like a normal firearm from the time period at first glance, but its design makes it one of the most unusual weapons of the Wild West. The Evans Repeater was actually designed by a dentist from Maine named Warren R. Evans. Along with his brother George, they started the Evans Rifle Manufacturing Company in hopes to land the ever-elusive government contract for the U.S. Army. Instead of typical methods of feeding ammunition into the gun, the Evans Repeater held up to 28 rounds in the buttstock of the gun. The rounds were then fed into the breech by rotating the ammunition in. The ammo capacity for the Evans was actually the largest capacity for any mass-produced rifle in the 19th century. Unfortunately for the company, the Evans Repeater failed to hold up in the dusty climates and was deemed unreliable by the U.S. government, thus bankrupting the company.
It's easy to look into the outlaws and gunfights of the Wild West. They capture our imaginations and have led to some of the most incredible stories in American culture. But what about the people who spent their lives bringing order to the lawless areas of the new formed country? These lawmen were just as important to American lore as the outlaws they chased. On this episode, we will be looking into the lives and legends of the Wild West's most influential lawmen. Welcome to Chronicles of Time, a channel that covers both well-known and obscure historical events. If you like what we're doing here, leave us a like, a comment, and please subscribe. It really does help the channel. The Three Guardsmen. This group of incredibly important lawmen was made up of Christian Madsen, William Pete Tillman Jr., and the leader with arguably the coolest nickname I've ever heard, Henry Heck Thomas. These three men were U.S. Marshals who had been given the task of taming the wild lands of Oklahoma in the early 1890s. Not only did this trio of lawmen tame the Oklahoma plains, they were responsible for ending one of the most famous outlaw games of the Old West, the Doolin Dalton Gang. The three men were also known as being unfazed in their pursuit of outlaws. Ignoring bad weather and known for their tracking abilities, the three lawmen were given the name Three Guardsmen by the outlaws they were after. We discussed this shootout in another video, but Heck Thomas was the reason that the Dalton gang attempted to rob two banks at the same time during their demise in Coffeyville, Kansas. Emmett Dalton, the only member of the Dalton gang who survived the massacre at Coffeyville, specifically said that Heck Thomas was the reason for the decision. The Three Guardsmen were really made famous for their methodical and relentless pursuit of the Doolin Gang. The Three Guardsmen found the Doolin Gang hiding out in Ingalls, Oklahoma, and a shootout broke loose. 3 deputies and 2 civilians were killed while only 1 outlaw was captured. Because of this failure, the 3 guardsmen were tasked to abandon all other responsibilities to pursue the Doolin Gang full-time. The trio tracked down Bill Doolin in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, when Tillman dressed as a preacher with a gun under his jacket. He surprised Doolin at a spa while he was there for a foot injury. After 6 months in prison, Bill Doolin escaped prison and made his way back to his wife's father's house in Lawson, Oklahoma. But Heck Thomas was there waiting with his fellow marshals and ordered for Bill Doolin to surrender. Doolin answered with gunfire and was shot dead by Heck Thomas. Chris Madsen led a posse that killed Doolin gang members Dynamite Dick Clifton and Richard Little Dick West. Tillman was responsible for the death of Little Bill Radler. The rest of the gang was slowly captured or killed by the three guardsmen. Heck Thomas went on to become chief of police in Lawton, Oklahoma, and died in 1912. Bill Tillman was elected to the Oklahoma State Senate. In 1924, Tillman was murdered by a man named Wiley Lynn while he was serving as town marshal for Cromwell, Oklahoma. 1 month after Tillman's death, the town of Cromwell was entirely burned to the ground. No building was left standing. Chris Madsen, the now last surviving member of the three guardsmen, is thought to be the one responsible for the arson. There was never an investigation conducted and the town of Cromwell never recovered. Chris Madsen himself died in 1944 at the ripe age of 93. The three guardsmen were said to have killed or captured over 300 outlaws during their time in Oklahoma. Dave Allison. William Davis Allison, also known as Dave Allison, was born in Ohio in 1861. He began his lifetime career as a lawman at the young age of 27. He moved to Texas and was elected the sheriff of Midland. With this appointment, he became the youngest sheriff of the Lone Star State. During his time there, he was coined as being the most efficient lawman in all of Texas. After serving 6 terms as sheriff in Midland, he moved to Arizona to join the Arizona Rangers. He reportedly killed the famous outlaw Three Finger Jack after a train robbery in Fairbank, Arizona. He also captured the outlaw Owen Brothers and Tom Bravo Juan Bowes. Dave Allison went on to serve with the Texas Rangers, the Roswell, New Mexico Chief of Police, and a bodyguard for mining magnate Bill Green during mining strikes in Mexico. Allison also led the posse that killed Mexican revolutionary turned outlaw Pascual Orizarco. The famous American general George S. Patton said that Dave Allison is, quote, the most noted gunman here in Texas. Dave Allison was killed in the line of duty in 1923 when he and another detective, Horace Robertson, were ambushed at the Gaines Hotel in Seminole, Texas, by infamous cattle rustlers Hill Loftus and Milton Good. It is said that with the death of Dave Allison came the end of the Texas frontier era. Bat Masterson. William Barclay Masterson was born in 1853 in Quebec, Canada. His family moved him around New York, Illinois, and landed near Wichita, Kansas in 1871. During his childhood years, he became very efficient with a firearm during his time hunting buffalo. When Bat was 18, he went on a buffalo hunt with his older brother Ed. They camped along the Salt Fork River in Comanche and Barber counties in Kansas when they ran into some hunters that would become legends of the Wild West. They were famous buffalo hunters Billy Dixon, Tom Nixon, who shot 120 buffalo in 40 minutes and set a record for killing 3,200 buffalo in 35 days, and someone all of us Western fans should be very familiar with, a man named Wyatt Earp. The Masterson brothers kept pushing into Native American territory in pursuit of buffalo and ended up establishing a large complex in the panhandle of Texas called Adobe Walls. It became an outpost that supported the huge influx of buffalo hunters. As expected, the Native Americans took this as a threat to their existence and led an attack on the small outpost. A force of 700 Comanche, Cheyenne, Kiowa, and Arapaho warriors attacked the camp on June 27th of 1874. 28 men, including Bat Masterson and Billy Dixon, took refuge in 2 different stores and the saloon. Although severely outnumbered, the hunters had superior weaponry and held off the attack for 4 days straight. Word got out and 100 men came to reinforce the post, which forced the Native Americans to retreat. An estimated 70 Native Americans were killed, while 4 men defending the adobe walls were killed. Because of this, an expedition was started out to the Texas Panhandle, and the Red River War against the Native Americans there began. Bat Masterson helped as a scout, but he went back to buffalo hunting and became a faro dealer. During his time as a dealer, he got into an argument with a man named Sergeant Melvin King over a card game and a woman named Molly Brennan. Firearms were drawn and Masterson shot Sergeant King dead. King did manage to fire at Masterson, but the bullet went through Molly Brennan before hitting him. Molly Brennan died from this wound, and the injury to Masterson caused him to walk with a limp for the rest of his life. After Bat Masterson healed from his injuries, he headed to Dodge City, Kansas to become a lawman, and Bat saw great success in his time there. He was elected sheriff in 1877, and when he took office in 1878, he immediately went to work. He stopped a train robbery in Kinsley, Kansas in the same month he took office. By April of 1878, Bat's brother Ed had become city marshal and got into an altercation with a man named Jack Wagner. After an altercation of the ordinance about carrying a firearm, Jack Wagner shot Ed Masterson in the back, mortally wounding him. Ed Masterson lived long enough to shoot Jack Wagner back, which was also fatal. This event led to a man named Charlie Bassett to be appointed to city marshal, and his assistant marshal? None other than Bat's old hunting buddy and Wild West royalty, Wyatt Earp. Bat Masterson would also stop the assassination attempts on the Dodge City mayor by a man named Spike Kennedy. On the second attempt, Kennedy killed a woman in the mayor's room and ran from town. Bat Masterson organized a posse with Charles Bassett, Wyatt Earp, and our old friend from the Three Guardsmen, Bill Tillman, along with William Duffy. They caught up to him the same day of the shooting and shot his horse from beneath him. Even though he was captured, Spike Kennedy was acquitted with a lack of evidence and released. Masterson was then appointed as Deputy U.S. Marshal and arrested a man named Dutch Henry Bourne, who was one of the biggest horse thieves in all of the American West at the time. The next month, Masterson was put in charge of bringing Cheyenne prisoners to stand trial after a fall raid. The state of Kansas charged them with 40 murders, and this would be identified later in history as the last Native American raid in Kansas. Masterson was then tasked with protecting the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad during a dispute with a rival company, the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, over the rights through the Royal Gorge in Colorado. Bat enlisted Doc Holliday, Dirty Dave, Mysterious Dave Mather, Ben Thompson, and about 70 others to help with this new endeavor. This would go on to be known as the Royal Gorge War. Although they saw success, the courts ruled in favor of the Denver-Rio Grande Railroad, and Bat had to concede. Masterson would move on to become a professional gambler all over the Wild West. By 1893, he was requested to go to New York City to help a bodyguard for a prominent man named George Gould. He would actually go on to become a sports writer for the New York Morning Telegraph. In 1905, Bat was appointed as a U.S. Marshal for the Southern District of New York until 1909. Bat Masterson would continue to write until his death in 1921. He died of a heart attack while working at his newspaper desk at the age of 67. American gunslingers and outlaws are the folk heroes of the Wild West. We have heard stories of famous outlaws such as Billy the Kid, Butch Cassidy, and the Sundance Kid. We know the lawmen who matched them not only in fame, but in skill with a firearm. But for this episode, we'll be covering gunslingers that are not stars of Hollywood movies or Netflix series. Today, we'll be discussing 5 gunslingers you've never heard of. Hello everyone, welcome to Chronicles of Time. If you like what we're doing here, leave a like, a comment, and please subscribe. It really does help the channel. Thank you to our amazing comments section for almost all of these gunslingers. Hank Vaughn. Hank Vaughn, also known as Henry Clay Vaughn, was an infamous gunslinger and outlaw based out of the Oregon Territory during the height of the Wild West time period. Hank got his criminal start early in life. At age 15, he had shot a man who refused to pay for a horse. While on bail, Hank shot the man who filed the original complaint. Hank's family begged the judge to show mercy to their young son. The judge agreed, and he sent Hank to the army instead of prison. However, Hank was discharged after only 45 days. By the age of 18, Hank, along with a man named Dan Burns, had rustled some horses for the Umatilla Native Americans. This tribe was historically located in the north central part of Oregon. Sheriff Frank Maddock and his deputy O.J. Hart quickly pursued Hank and Dan Burns. The lawmen snuck up on the outlaws during the early hours of the morning, and a gunfight ensued. Both Dan Burns and Deputy O.J. Hart were killed in the gunfight. Hank Vaughn and Sheriff Maddock were wounded, but they did live. Hank Vaughn escaped for the time being, but was caught and given a life sentence in the new territorial prison of Salem. Hank Vaughn's story does not end here. His family again began to beg for leniency, and the Oregon governor pardoned Hank Vaughn in 1870. He continued his outlaw life even after being married in 1875. He was involved in a gunfight in Arizona where Hank was shot in the head but survived. He made his way back to Oregon in 1878 and remarried, and from there he started rustling cattle with some Native Americans from the Umatilla Reservation. This caused anger to grow amongst the ranchers, and vigilantes had begun to form. This led to an altercation at the Till Glazes Saloon in Prineville, Oregon. A ranch boss named Charlie Long confronted Hank Vaughn, and Vaughn offered to buy Charlie Long a round of drinks. When Long refused, a gunfight broke out and both men were shot. Miraculously, both men survived. Vaughn continued cattle rustling and got into another altercation in 1886 with a man named Bill Falwell. Hank started shooting at Bill Falwell's feet, making him dance like you see in famous movies. In retaliation, Falwell shot Vaughn in the arm. In 1893, Vaughn went to Pendleton to get his horse shod and to get a couple drinks at saloons. On his way out, his horse slipped in its gallop and crushed Hank. Hank's skull was fractured and he survived 2 weeks in a coma until he finally died on June 15th of 1893. Hank Vaughn's buried in an unmarked grave in Pendleton, Oregon. Jim Miller. Jim Miller, also known as Killer Miller, was an outlaw born in Van Buren, Arkansas in 1861. At just 1, his family moved to Texas. Miller started his life of crime by murdering his sister's husband, a man named John Coop. Coop was found dead in his bed with a shotgun blast in 1880. It was well known that Killer Miller hated his brother-in-law, and he was soon arrested. Jim Miller was sentenced to life in prison, but his attorneys took the case to the Texas Court of Appeals, and the conviction was reversed on a technicality. This run-in with the law did not set Jim Miller straight. He hooked up with an outlaw gang in San Saba County, Texas, and began robbing trains, stagecoaches, and killing during both. Jim Miller bought into a saloon in San Saba and actually began a career as an assassin. His price varied between $150 to $2,000, and he earned a reputation for getting the job done quickly and efficiently. He was also known for assassinating targets at night with a shotgun. The wild thing about Jim Miller was his appearance. He didn't drink, he didn't curse, and didn't smoke. He was always very well dressed and known to regularly attend church. Some even called him Deacon Miller. He wasn't known as a fast draw for a gunfighter, but he would use his firearm when it suited him. Over the next few years, Miller became town marshal in Pecos, Texas, and gained a reputation for killing Mexicans, claiming that they were trying to escape. Miller then began a feud with the Pecos sheriff, Sheriff Bud Frazier. While away on business, Sheriff Bud Frazier heard that Jim Miller had planned a shootout for when the sheriff returned. Sheriff Frazier contacted the Texas Rangers to intercept his plans, and in September of 1893, Jim Miller, along with his accomplices, were arrested for conspiring to kill Sheriff Frazier. Jim Miller did find his way out of this one. He had his henchmen track down all the witnesses and had them killed. With no witnesses, the state was forced to let them go. By 1894, the feud between Sheriff Bud Frazier and Jim Miller would come to a head. Frazier encountered Jim Miller on the street and yelled, quote, "Jim, you're a cattle rustler and a murderer," and opened fire. Sheriff Frazier shot Miller in the arm and emptied his pistol into Miller's chest, leaving him to die. There was something Sheriff Frazier didn't know about Jim Miller. Jim Miller wore a large black frock at all times. Underneath his frock, a metal breastplate to protect his chest from gunfire. Miller lived, and Frazier moved to New Mexico after he lost his sheriff election. Miller continued his work as an assassin in the early 1900s, despite the fact that his family had become wealthy through real estate. He assassinated business rivals, attorneys, lawmen, and anyone who was on the receiving end of an assassination request. Even though Miller had been seen during these assassinations, he always found a way to stay out of jail, either through self-defense claims or by having the witnesses murdered before trial. Miller's luck ran out in 1909. He was contracted by local ranchers Jesse West and Joe Allen through a middleman named Barry Burrell. The target was a man named Gus Bobbitt in Ada, Oklahoma. Bobbitt was a cattle rancher and former deputy U.S. Marshal. Gus Bobbitt was ambushed at his house after returning from town. Jim Miller shot Bobbitt in the side with a shotgun, his signature move. A 19-year-old cowhand, Oscar Peeler, was the witness to turn the men in and actually had been paid to lead the men to where Bobbitt lived. The Texas Rangers tracked the men down and extradited them to Oklahoma to stand trial. Ada residents knew Jim Miller's reputation for getting his convictions overturned and being acquitted for crimes that he committed. So, the town decided to take matters into their own hands. A group of roughly 30 to 40 members of a lynch mob broke into the jail around 2 or 3 in the morning and drug all 4 suspects to a stable behind the jail. Jim Miller remained stone cold as his 3 accomplices begged for their life. Jim Miller made a request to have his diamond ring be given to his wife and for him to wear his black hat while he was being hanged. The wishes were granted. It is reported that Jim Miller shouted, quote, "Let her rip," before voluntarily stepping off his box to hang. Jim Miller's body was returned to Texas, and he's buried at the Oakwood Cemetery in Fort Worth. John Wesley Hardin. John Hardin
was born in 1853 in the state of Texas and is known as one of the most notorious killers of the Texas frontier. Hardin got his criminal life started at the early age of 15 after killing an ex-slave named Mage after an altercation stemming from a wrestling match. Knowing that Union soldiers would come looking for him, Hardin's dad sent him into hiding. The authorities finally discovered his hiding place, and 3 Union soldiers were sent to arrest him. John Hardin decided to confront his pursuers, saying the following, quote, "I waylaid them, as I had no mercy on men whom I knew only wanted to get my body to torture and kill. It was war to the knife for me, and I brought it on by opening the fight with a double-barrel shotgun and ended it with a cap and ball 6-shooter. Thus, it was by the fall of 1868 I had killed 4 men and myself wounded in the arm." End quote. Hardin became a fugitive after this encounter and made his way across Texas drinking, gambling, and killing. There's also a tale about his run-in with the famous Wild Bill in Abilene, Kansas. While on the run, an 18-year-old John Hardin, who was known as Little Arkansas in town, was in the Bull's Head Tavern for a drink. A man named Ben Thompson tried his best to get Hardin to confront Wild Bill over a dispute at Ben's saloon. Ben Thompson told Hardin, quote, "He's a damn Yankee, picks on rebels, especially Texans, to kill." John Hardin responded, "If Bill needs killing, why don't you kill him yourself?" This is where the story really sounds like legend. Wild Bill confronted Hardin for wearing guns on him in town. It violated town ordinance. Wild Bill ordered Hardin to hand his guns over, and Hardin surprisingly agreed. When Wild Bill went to grab the guns, which he was handed butt first, John Hardin flipped them around to where the barrel was now facing Wild Bill. Now, historians think this is an unlikely story, but I think this is what makes legends of these outlaws so fascinating. The confidence and bravado they exhibit their entire life makes this story believable. In 1872, John Hardin got involved in a Texas feud between the Sutton and Taylor families. Hardin himself decided to ally with the Taylor family, and even more death followed. While celebrating his 21st birthday in Comanche, Texas, Hardin spotted a beloved deputy sheriff named Charles Webb. Hardin asked the deputy if he was there to arrest him, which the deputy replied that he was not there for that. Hardin then invited the sheriff over for a drink, but when the deputy entered the hotel, Hardin and his accomplices opened fire and killed the deputy. This murder would not go unpunished. The governor of Texas, Richard B. Hubbard, offered a reward for Hardin's arrest. The Texas Rangers intercepted letters that Hardin was sending to family and found out that Hardin had fled to Florida after the murder of Charles Webb. In 1877, the Texas Rangers caught up to Hardin and placed him under arrest. They were only able to subdue him after Hardin's Colt 44 pistol was caught in his suspenders. Hardin was tried for the killing of Charles Webb and sentenced to 25 years in prison in the town of Huntsville, Texas. While in prison, Hardin began to study theology and wrote an autobiography which is said to be wildly exaggerated. In 1894, Hardin was released from prison after serving 17 years of his 25-year sentence. He moved to Gonzales, Texas, and passed the state bar exam and obtained his license to practice law. John Wesley would meet his end on August 19th of 1895. John Wesley Hardin had gotten into an altercation with an El Paso lawman named John Selman Jr. after the lawman arrested one of Hardin's acquaintances. John Selman's father, Constable John Selman Sr., himself a notorious gunman and former outlaw, had a heated exchange with John Wesley Hardin. That evening, Hardin was playing dice at Acme Saloon, where he said his last words, quote, 4 6s to beat. Shortly after, Selman Sr. shot Hardin in the back of the head. Selman was acquitted, but later died in a shootout.
Hardin was said to have 27 confirmed kills, while he claimed to have 42 before his death. John Wesley Hardin is buried in El Paso. Dallas Stoudemire. Dallas Stoudemire was born in Alabama in 1845 and was a famed lawman and gunfighter who served his early years in the Confederate Army. Dallas was discharged when officers learned that he was only 15 when he enlisted in the Army, and his huge height allowed him to pass for an older man. He was wounded multiple times during the war and is recorded to be 6'4" by the end of the Civil War. After that war, Dallas went west and served 3 years with the Texas Rangers. He was known to be well-dressed and a gentleman around women, but when he drank, he was known as being extremely dangerous. His life after the Texas Rangers is undocumented until around 1878. It's believed he was living in Mexico because of his ability to speak Spanish so well. Dallas resurfaces as town marshal in New Mexico until his brother-in-law told him that they need help in El Paso because of how lawless the town had become. They wanted a lawman that had a, quote, rough reputation. Dallas traveled to El Paso, Texas, and within 3 days of his arrival, he was involved in arguably the most famous gunfight in Wild West history. This dispute is named, quote, 4 dead in 5 seconds gunfight. The gunfight was so famous that it made it to newspapers in San Francisco and New York. 75 heavily armed Mexican cowboys came looking for 2 younger cowboys who had been missing along with 30 cattle. They approached the county constable, Gus Crimcaw, and asked him to lead them to a possible location. Gus agreed and led them to a ranch owned by a man named Johnny Hale. There, they found the bodies of the missing cowboys, and 2 cattle rustlers named Peeler and Stevenson were arrested after bragging about the killings. John Hale, the man who owned the ranch, and his friend George Campbell became angry that Gus Crimcaw had been the interpreter between the Mexican posse and the judge in El Paso. Later that day, the constable went into Keating's saloon and ran into George Campbell and a heavily intoxicated John Hale. An argument began, and John Hale grabbed a gun from George Campbell and shot Constable Gus. Hale took off running after realizing what he had done and ran right into Dallas Stoudemire. Dallas shot wildly, and a bullet hit an innocent Mexican bystander. When Hale peeked from behind the post he was hiding behind, Dallas Stoudemire shot him between the eyes. Seeing Hale go down, George Campbell threw his hands up and saying, quote, "Gentlemen, this is not my fight." The wounded Constable Crimcaw disagreed and shot George Campbell in the wrist and the toe, and at the same time, Dallas Stoudemire spun around and shot Campbell in the stomach 3 times. When everything settled, John Hale, George Campbell, and Constable Crimcaw, along with the innocent bystander, were dead. This started a feud between Stoudemire and a family called the Mannings. The Mannings were close friends to both Hale and Campbell. James Manning convinced former Deputy Marshal Bill Johnson to assassinate Dallas Stoudemire for his role in the famous gunfight. Bill Johnson agreed and got heavily intoxicated to commit the murder. Bill Johnson heard Dallas Stoudemire from his hiding place, but in his drunken stupor, tripped backward, causing his shotgun to fire into the air. Dallas saw this and shot Bill Johnson 8 times, killing the man. The feud would end with a win for the Mannings. The following year, Doc Manning, James Manning, and Frank Manning confronted Dallas in a saloon to make, quote, a peace treaty. Temper started to flare after Dallas began mocking the Mannings. Guns were drawn, and James Manning came up from behind Dallas Stoudemire and shot him behind the left ear, killing him instantly. Doc Manning started to beat Dallas over the head after he was killed with his own gun. Dallas Stoudemire's body was shipped back to Columbus, Texas, with all expenses paid by the Masonic Lodge. He is buried in the Arlington Cemetery in Colorado County, Texas. Dallas Stoudemire is known as the man who tamed
El Paso, Texas. Commodore Perry Owens. Commodore Perry Owens was born in Tennessee and was named after the great naval commander Commodore Perry, who found his success over the British in the War of 1812. His family moved to Indiana, but by 13, Owens ran away from home to head west. He got his start hunting buffalo for the railroad and became an incredible shot. He was able to fire his rifle accurately from the hip and could fire pistols incredibly accurate in both hands. In 1881, at the age of 28, Owens moved to Navajo Springs, Arizona, which is present-day Holbrook. There are myths about Commodore Perry Owens and his encounters with the local Navajo. Owens allegedly killed 2 Navajo warriors and earned the name Iron Man. He was arrested by a U.S. Indian agent for the murder of a young Navajo boy, but Owens claimed that the boy was trying to rustle horses and was acquitted of murder by an Apache County jury. In 1886, Owens won the sheriff's office after earning the support of the Apache County Stock Growers Association, along with the Mormon and Mexican population living in the area. Owens was responsible for 21,177 square miles of territory. One of the newspapers said, quote, "Mr. Owens is a quiet, unassuming man, strictly honorable and upright in his dealings with all men, and is immensely popular." Owens had the jail cleaned up and accounted for public funds down to the postage stamps that he used. Commodore Perry Owens is most famous for the Owens-Blevins shootout. Sometimes it's called the Holbrook shootout. A man named Andy Cooper, whose real name was Blevins, he changed it because he was wanted in Texas, was accused of running a gang of horse thieves in northern Arizona. The pressure was on the sheriff to handle Andy Cooper and his gang of thieves. On September 4th of 1887, Sheriff Owens rode into town to serve a warrant for Cooper's arrest. Commodore Owens saw Andy Cooper and his brother John Blevins ride up to their house in Holbrook. Commodore Perry Owens knocked on the door and told the two that he had a warrant for Andy Cooper. Cooper refused to go, and Commodore Perry Owens shot him with his Winchester. Owens then stepped off the front porch and shot John Blevins in the shoulder. A man named Moss Roberts sprung from the house to engage Commodore, but Commodore opened fire on Moss Roberts. After 10 seconds, the 15-year-old Sam Blevins rushed out of the door with Andy Cooper's pistol in his hand before Commodore Perry shot him dead in front of the young boy's own mother. Commodore Perry Owens calmly saddled his horse and rode off. The young Sam Blevins died immediately, while Cooper and Roberts died later. John Blevins was wounded, but survived and convicted of assault with intent to murder Commodore Owens. The gunfight was not a popular one in town, and Owens did not seek re-election for sheriff after that. Commodore Perry Owens died at the age of 66 in 1919 from brain disease. It is said that he saw the ghost of the men he killed before his death. Thank you for watching Chronicles of Time. If you like what we're doing here, leave a like, a comment, and please subscribe. It really does help the channel. Thank you all again for the suggestions. Please keep them coming. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers, y'all.